I never thought I'd be the one telling a story like this. You know those tales you hear about creepy neighbors? The ones that make you double-check your locks at night? Well, I used to laugh them off. Not anymore. This is my story, and I swear every word of it is true. It all started when I moved into my new house on Maple Street. A quaint little neighborhood, picket fences and all. The kind of place where you'd expect to borrow sugar from your neighbor, not, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The day I moved in, I noticed the house next door. It stood out, and not in a good way. Overgrown lawn, peeling paint, windows perpetually shuttered. I remember thinking, great, the neighborhood eyesore had to be right next to me. As I was unloading boxes, an elderly woman approached. Her smile seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about her eyes. They never quite focused on me. "Welcome to the neighborhood, dear," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm Mrs. Abernathy from across the street. I do hope you'll be happier here than the last family." I paused, a box half lifted from my car. "What do you mean, happier than the last family?" Mrs. Abernathy's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, nothing to worry about, dear. Just neighborhood gossip. You know how it is." But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling her words left me with. As she walked away, I could have sworn I heard her mutter, "May God have mercy on your soul." That night, as I lay in bed surrounded by unpacked boxes, I heard it for the first time. A low, mournful wail coming from the house next door. It sounded almost inhuman. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a stray cat. But deep down, I knew better. Days passed, and I settled into a routine. But I couldn't ignore the strange occurrences. The constant feeling of being watched. The whispers I heard when no one was around. And always, that decrepit house next door loomed in my peripheral vision. It was about a week after I moved in that I first saw him. My neighbor. I was in my backyard, attempting to set up a grill, when movement caught my eye. There, peering through a gap in the fence, was a face. Pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the shadows. Our gazes locked for just a moment before he disappeared. My heart raced as I ran inside, slamming the door behind me. What had I just seen? Was my mind playing tricks on me? That night, the wailing was louder than ever. But this time, it was accompanied by scratching sounds, as if something was trying to claw its way in. I huddled under my blankets, too terrified to move. The next morning, I steeled my nerves and decided to confront my neighbor. I marched up to his door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open slightly, seemingly of its own accord. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "I'm your new neighbor. I was hoping we could talk." Silence. Then, a whisper so faint I almost missed it. "Leave. Before it's too late." I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the porch. As I regained my balance, I saw a shadow move behind the curtained window. A hand pressed against the glass, leaving a smear of what looked horribly like blood. I ran back to my house, my mind reeling. What was going on? What had I gotten myself into? That night, I couldn't sleep. The wailing had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse. Around 3 a.m., I heard a knock at my door. soft at first, then growing more insistent. Against my better judgment, I crept downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Just as my fingers brushed the cold metal, a face suddenly pressed against the other side of the peephole. It was my neighbor, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "Let me in," he rasped. "They're coming. They're coming for us all." I stumbled back, my heart pounding. "Who's coming?" I shouted through the door. "What's going on?" His only response was a chilling laugh that morphed into a sob. I heard his footsteps retreating, then silence once again. The next day, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to sell the house, neighborhood gossip be damned. As I was putting up the for sale sign, Mrs. Abernathy appeared. "Leaving so soon, dear?" she asked, that unsettling smile back on her face. "I can't stay here," I said. "Something's not right about this place." Her smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp. "Oh, but you can't leave. None of us can. Don't you see? We're all part of it now." Before I could respond, a scream pierced the air. It came from the house next door. Without thinking, I ran towards it, Mrs. Abernathy's laughter echoing behind me. I burst through the unlocked door, the stench of decay hitting me like a wall. The interior was a nightmare of peeling wallpaper and rotting furniture. And there, in the center of the living room, stood my neighbor. He turned to me, his eyes now completely black. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and despair. "But now that you're here, you can help us." "Help you with what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gestured around him, and suddenly the room was filled with shadowy figures. Men, women, children, all with the same black eyes. "To break the cycle," he said. "To end this curse." I backed away, my back hitting the wall. "What curse? What's happening?" One of the shadows stepped forward, a young girl, no more than 10. "We're trapped," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Trapped in this neighborhood. In these houses. In this endless nightmare. But you're new. You can set us free." My neighbor nodded. "All it takes is a sacrifice. One soul to free the rest. Will you help us?" I shook my head, terror gripping my heart. "No, this isn't real. This can't be real." As I turned to run, the door slammed shut. The shadows converged on me, their cold hands grasping at my clothes, my skin. "Join us," they chanted. "Become one with the neighborhood. It's the only way." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for this all to be a bad dream. When I opened them, I was back in my bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, I felt relief wash over me. It had all been a nightmare. But as I got up, I noticed something on my arm. A mark, like a brand, in the shape of a house. I ran to the window and looked out at the neighborhood. Everything seemed normal. Mrs. Abernathy was watering her plants. Kids were playing in the street. And the house next door, it looked perfectly maintained, its paint fresh and lawn manicured. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. As I stand here, Looking out at the seemingly idyllic street, I can feel it. The pull, the whispers, the shadows lurking just out of sight. I know now that I'm part of something bigger, something darker than I could have ever imagined. And I can't help but wonder, who will be the next to move in? Who will be the next to join our cursed little community? If you're reading this, consider it a warning. Be careful where you choose to live. Because sometimes, the most horrifying stories aren't the ones you read about or see in movies. Sometimes, they're the ones unfolding right next door. And remember, if you ever find yourself on Maple Street, whatever you do, don't answer when your neighbor knocks. Because once you're in, there's no way out. Trust me, I know. The shadows are calling me now. I can hear them scratching at my door. I don't know how much longer I can resist. But I had to share my story, had to warn others. If you're out there, if you're reading this, please help us. Break the curse. Set us free. Before it's too late. Before you become one of us too. Days blend into weeks, and weeks into months. Time loses all meaning in this cursed neighborhood. I've long since stopped trying to leave. The few times I've attempted to drive away, I've found myself inexplicably back on Maple Street, as if the roads themselves conspire against my escape. The mark on my arm, that brand in the shape of a house, has grown. It now covers most of my forearm, the lines pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly glow. Sometimes, I swear I can hear it whispering to me, urging me to give in, to fully embrace the darkness that permeates this place. I've taken to watching the street from my window, documenting the comings and goings of my neighbors. Mrs. Abernathy still waters her plants daily, her movements mechanical, her eyes vacant. The children playing in the street never seem to age, their laughter echoing with an unnatural hollowness. And then there's the house next door. Some days it appears dilapidated and abandoned, other times pristine and inviting. The man I once saw there, my neighbor with the wild eyes, I haven't seen him in weeks. But I hear him. Oh, how I hear him. Every night, as the sun dips below the horizon and shadows lengthen, the wailing begins. It's a sound that chills me to my very core, a symphony of torment that speaks of unimaginable suffering. And yet, I find myself drawn to it, as if some part of me recognizes it as a siren call to join whatever hellish existence awaits on the other side. It's on one such night, as I sit by my window, that I see her. A young woman, clearly new to the neighborhood, struggling with moving boxes. My heart races. A new victim. A potential savior. I want to scream at her to run, to get as far away from here as possible. But I know it's already too late. She's here now. She's part of it. I watch as Mrs. Abernathy approaches her, that same unsettling smile plastered on her face. I can almost hear the conversation, the same one I had months ago. Welcome to the neighborhood. I hope you'll be happier here than the last family. As night falls, I steel myself. I have to warn her. It might be my last chance at redemption, my final opportunity to break this cycle of horror. I sneak out of my house, careful to avoid the pools of streetlight. The shadows seem to reach for me, tendrils of darkness caressing my skin. I shudder, pressing on towards the newcomer's home. I'm halfway across her lawn when I hear it. The sound of breaking glass, followed by a blood-curdling scream. I freeze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Help me, her voice pierces the night. Oh God, someone please help me. I should run. Every instinct tells me to flee, to hide, to save myself. But I can't. Not again. Not this time. I burst through her front door, the scene before me straight out of a nightmare. The young woman is on the floor, scrambling backward, her eyes wide with terror. And there, advancing on her, are the shadows. Dozens of them. Men, women, children, all with those pitch-black eyes, their forms flickering and shifting like smoke. Get away from her! I yell, surprised by the strength in my voice. The shadows turn to me, their hollow eyes boring into my soul. And then, to my horror, they smile. It's a grotesque sight, their faces splitting impossibly wide. You've come to join us at last, they speak as one, their voices a discordant chorus. We've been waiting for you. I feel a tug, an inexorable pull towards them. The mark on my arm burns, the house shape glowing brighter than ever. I look down to see tendrils of shadow beginning to creep up my legs. No! I cry out, fighting against the pull. I won't let you take her. I won't let you take me. I reach out to the young woman, our fingers barely touching. In that moment of contact, something extraordinary happens. A spark of light ignites between us, growing brighter and brighter until it's a blinding beacon. The shadows shriek, recoiling from the light. I hear Mrs. Abernathy's voice, distorted and inhuman. What have you done? The light continues to grow, enveloping me and the young woman. I feel a warmth spreading through me, burning away the darkness that had begun to take root in my soul. The mark on my arm fades, leaving unmarked skin in its wake. As the light reaches its zenith, I hear a sound like shattering glass. The world around us seems to fracture, reality itself splintering and falling away. When the light finally fades, we find ourselves standing on an ordinary street. The houses are normal, the shadows just shadows. In the distance, I hear the sound of traffic, of life. The young woman looks at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. What just happened? She asks, her voice trembling. I shake my head, hardly daring to believe it myself. I think we broke the curse. We're free. As the words leave my mouth, I hear a chorus of voices, faint but unmistakable. Thank you, they seem to say. We're free too. I look around, half expecting to see the shadowy figures, but there's nothing. Just an ordinary street on an ordinary night. And yet, I can feel it, a lightness, as if a great weight has been lifted. We should go, I say to the young woman. Just in case. She nods, and together we walk away from Maple Street, away from the nightmare that had consumed so much of our lives. As we reach the main road, I can't help but look back one last time. For a moment, just a fleeting instant, I see them. The shadows. But they're different now. The blackness in their eyes is gone, replaced by a warm light. They smile, not the horrifying rictus from before, but genuine smiles of gratitude and peace. And then, like mist in the morning sun, they fade away. I turn back to the young woman, whose name I still don't know. What now? She asks. I take a deep breath, savoring the first truly free air I've breathed in months. Now we live. We remember. And we stay vigilant. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that darkness can take root anywhere. But so can light. And it's up to us to choose which one we nurture. As we walk into the night, towards an uncertain but hopeful future, I can't shake the feeling that our ordeal on Maple Street was just the beginning. That there are other neighborhoods out there, other curses to break, other souls to save. But for now, I'm content to put one foot in front of the other, to feel the solid ground beneath my feet and know that it won't suddenly shift and bring me back to that hellish place. The young woman's hand finds mine, a silent gesture of solidarity. We've been through something impossible together, something that has forever changed us. And as we walk, I realize that while the curse of Maple Street may be broken, our story is far from over. Because out there in the darkness, in the spaces between shadow and light, other horrors await. Other neighbors with secrets too terrible to imagine. And someday, we might be called upon again to face them. But for now, we walk. We breathe. We live. And we remain ever watchful for the telltale signs of darkness creeping in at the edges of our world. Because now we know the truth that sometimes, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that hide under our beds or in our closets. Sometimes, they're the ones that live right next door, hiding behind friendly smiles and picket fences. And it's up to us, the ones who've seen the truth, who've faced the darkness and emerged to stand guard against the night. As we disappear into the city, leaving Maple Street far behind, I can't help but wonder, how many other cursed neighborhoods are out there? How many other souls are trapped, waiting for someone to set them free? And more importantly, when the time comes to face the darkness again, will we be ready? Only time will tell. But for now, we walk on, two survivors of an impossible horror, carrying with us the knowledge that the line between nightmare and reality is far thinner than most people realize. And as we go, I silently vow to never again ignore the warning signs, to never dismiss the stories of creepy neighbors or haunted houses. Because now I know the truth. Sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the ones that are all too real. The ones that unfold not on movie screens or in the pages of books, but in the house right next door. So if you're reading this, consider it both a warning and a call to action. Keep your eyes open. Trust your instincts. And if you ever find yourself on a street that feels just a little too perfect, a little too quiet, remember my story. Remember Maple Street. And whatever you do, don't ignore the shadows. Because they're watching. They're waiting. And they're always, always hungry for more.